Good morning, YouTube. It was about 4:35, May 5th, Cinco de Mayo. Brother man, if you're watching this, happy birthday. Anyways, this is one of those news humors that if it doesn't make you laugh, it's gonna make you cry. I apologize for not having the videos come out about the judge arresting man for exercising his right to remain silent, but this is kind of a continuation of that. I'm waiting for some equipment to make those videos a lot better than what I could do without that equipment. Anyways, I saw this excerpt in Fox News talking about how tyranny is the new normal. Let's take a look at some of the highlights.
Totalitarianism does not shock us anymore. Maybe that's because all of a sudden, it's all around us. You may have seen this tape already. If not, you've likely seen many more like it in the past few weeks. Two armed officers arrive at a family's home in Wisconsin. Someone has reported the mother to police for arranging a play date for her daughter. That's now a crime. Here's what happened next.
Are you aware that we're in a stay-at-home order right now?
Yeah, obviously.
By the government?
Yes, I am aware.
Okay, you're aware of that?
I am aware.
So I don't need to explain that to you?
Why are you here?
Because your daughter is going to play at other people's home and you're allowing it to happen. Stop having your kid go by other people's home.
Are we done here?
No, we're not.
Okay.
Your middle initial and your last name.
I'm not giving it to you. I haven't done anything wrong.
Okay.
I already
Perfect.
got it.
We got it.
Yes.
Okay.
And that'll be documented too, that you're uncooperative.
You were uncooperative. That will be documented. Notice the tone they strike with this mother. They are standing on her property, uninvited, hectoring her about the so-called crime of allowing her daughter to play outside the house. They're not apologizing for this. They're not embarrassed to be carrying out an order that has no basis in science. They are utterly self-confident. They treat her with pure contempt like a peasant. And later, the Calumet County Sheriff's Department posted an account of what happened on their Facebook page. In it, they refer to that mother's mobile home 6 times. Just, she lives in a mobile home. Oh, just a prole, just a peasant. Shut up and obey. Who cares what she thinks? They believe they have the right to do that. The question is, where exactly do they get that right? In 3 sentences, Governor Pritzker framed himself as a leader of historic stature. Those who doubt his decrees are, quote, enemies of science and reason, enemies of civilization itself, enemies of the state. 2 days later, on this Wednesday, it emerged that Pritzker's own wife, who has her own state employees, was one of these people. His wife apparently had violated the lockdown herself. Governor Pritzker was asked about this. Here's how he responded.
What is your response to people who say the stay-at-home order and non-essential travel bans aren't being abided by your family? I believe there's a report from Illinois Rising Action that says that she recently traveled to Florida.
Well, first of all, I want to say that in politics, it used to be that we kept our families out of it. My official duties have nothing to do with my family. So I'm just not going to answer that question. It's inappropriate, and I find it reprehensible, honestly, that reporter wrote a story about it.
Please move away from each other and separate.
Elizabeth, New Jersey is now using drones to spread the life-saving message.
You are not immune to this virus.
Move away from each other, commands the state of New Jersey. Break it up! Your God-given right to free assembly has been suspended indefinitely. Back inside, proles, or you will face the consequences. MSNBC applauds this as if it's all completely normal. In fact, it is, they tell us, a life-saving message. Handmaidens to the corona security state. But to their credit, at least MSNBC put it on television. Most outlets don't even bother to cover stories like this. The other day, prosecutors in New Jersey charged 9 people for daring to participate in a Jewish wedding in their backyard. A few months ago, that would have made the news. For 250 years, Americans have enjoyed the unfettered right to practice their faith as they choose. Now they don't. It happened overnight. Last month, Christians across the country were legally prohibited from celebrating Easter in their own churches. The national media barely noted it. How exactly is this happening? Well, it turns out that's not clear. Strangely, not very many people have asked. Politicians have no right to do any of this. They cannot make it illegal for people to go to religious services. The Constitution of the United States expressly prohibits that. The words could not be clearer. The First Amendment explicitly prevents government from making any law that inhibits the exercise of religious faith. That's not a detail or a footnote. It is a cornerstone of our history and of our legal system. Millions of people, probably your ancestors, fled to this country from around the world precisely because our Bill of Rights gave them this guarantee. It's why this country was founded. What can't politicians do in the name of public health? As it stands, politicians won't let people worship or work or go to school or see their aging parents. They've placed the nation under house arrest. That's happening today, right now. But let's say we all get more afraid. What then? What couldn't they start doing? Could they intern people? Seriously. You can dismiss the possibility of that if you like, but remember that just a few months ago, most of us would have dismissed as ludicrous the possibility that propaganda-spewing drones would be hovering above.
That's interesting. Well, I don't think tyranny is the new normal, considering that the man I'm going to release the audio for, he got arrested for exercising his right to remain silent over 2.5 years ago. Tyranny is the old normal. It's just right now, people are starting to see it more because of what's going on. Now, this next highlights of videos for news. I really enjoy this guy, Viva Fry. He's an attorney in Montreal. If y'all get a chance, go check out his YouTube channel. I'm going to link it here. He's talking about how in Michigan, if you believed that you had inalienable rights, that there was a court order that probably is going to frustrate you.
Fair warning, if you thought you had any inalienable rights and freedoms, such as the freedom to leave your home, you're probably going to find this court order somewhat frustrating to read. Viva Fry, Montreal litigator turned YouTuber, another day in lockdown, and another vlog analyzing a court order adjudicating on the constitutionality of said lockdown. What is going on today? Well, a group of Michigan citizens filed a lawsuit against the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, seeking in particular a preliminary injunction and a declaration that certain executive orders violated their constitutional rights to due process. For those of you who may not know, Gretchen Whitmer issued sweeping executive orders and stay-at-home orders, going so far as to ban the sale of seeds, which were apparently deemed to be non-essential items. People found these sweeping executive orders to be almost oppressive. It led to protests, and sure as sugar, it led to a lawsuit. State of Michigan Court of Claims. Steve Martinko et al. Plaintiffs versus Gretchen Whitmer in her official capacity as governor of the state of Michigan. Daniel Eichinger in his official capacity as director of the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, and Dana Nessel in her official capacity as the attorney general for the state of Michigan. Opinion and order regarding plaintiff's April 23, 2020 motion for a preliminary injunction. Honorable Christopher M. Murray. Our individual constitutional rights cannot be suspended or eliminated. They are, as noted, subject to reasonable regulation by the state. So I'm going to just make sure I understand the reasoning here. Individual constitutional rights cannot be eliminated or suspended, but they can be regulated by the state, even if that regulation entails the elimination or suspension of those individual constitutional rights.
Gotcha.
In addressing this argument, it is imperative to recognize the limited question the court is empowered to decide. Except in limited circumstances mentioned later, it is not for the courts to pass on the wisdom of state action that is granted to it by the general police power or by statute. Certainly, the state cannot simply ignore the individual rights enshrined in our federal or state constitution in the name of public health threat. Judicial review of state actions is therefore and quite obviously appropriate and necessary. But the depth of that review is limited and does not include delving deep into the pros and cons of what is the better plan of action between two reasonable alternatives. The circular reasoning in this judgment reads like a dog chasing its tail. Americans and Michiganites, Michigan, people from Michigan love their liberty. Although Americans have individual constitutional rights that cannot be suspended or eliminated, they are nonetheless subject to regulation by the state. One cannot blame someone for reading this judgment and coming to the conclusion that they basically have no rights that the state does not bestow to them. And in determining whether to issue the preliminary injunction, the court comes to the following conclusion as to the likelihood of success on the merits. Binding authority from the United States Supreme Court and the Michigan Supreme Court compels this court to conclude that plaintiffs do not have a substantial likelihood of success on the merits. That is not because the rights asserted asserted by plaintiffs are not fundamental, being forced, with some important exceptions, by the state to remain in one's home, in turn causing many residents to be unable to work, visit elderly relatives, and to generally move about the state. But those liberty interests are, and always have been, subject to society's interests. Society being our fellow residents. They, our fellow residents, have an interest to remain unharmed by a highly communicable and deadly virus, and since the state entered the Union in 1837, it has had the broad power to act for the public health of the entire state when faced with a public crisis. The role courts play under Jacob and Lansing is not to, quote, second-guess the state's policy choices in crafting emergency public health measures, but is instead to determine whether the state regulation has a, quote, real or substantial relation to the public health crisis and are not beyond all question a plain, palpable invasion of rights secured by the fundamental law. Plaintiffs suggest that the better and more constitutionally sound decision would have been to quarantine only those who have the virus. It may have been a better option to some, as doing so may have had a less severe impact on the movement of the Michigan population, and may have reduced unemployment. Or, as plaintiffs argue, a more narrowly tailored order by region may have been more reasonable for the entire state. Contrary to plaintiffs' arguments, the Supreme Court has upheld against a constitutional challenge a state's quarantine of individuals even when they are not infected with the disease being controlled. As noted, the court's role is not to pick which alternative may be more reasonable, more preferential, or more narrowly tailored, as the latter is in deciding some constitutional cases. Monday morning quarterbacking is the role of sports fans, not courts reviewing the factual basis supporting executive action to protect the public health. What the court must do and can only do is determine whether the governor's orders are consistent with the law. Under the applicable standards, they are. I don't understand the reasoning of the court, and it bothers me. And when I say I don't understand the reasoning of the court, it's not in this stubborn, childish sort of, I don't agree with you, so I don't understand what you're saying. It's that I don't understand the logic behind the reasoning because it seems to be circular, if not contradictory. Americans have fundamental individual constitutional rights. Okay, these fundamental individual constitutional rights cannot be suspended or eliminated, but they can be regulated even if the effect is a temporary suspension or elimination of those rights. Okay, the courts are not there to assess or pick the best course of action that the government ought to have implemented. Okay, the only thing the courts can and must do is determine whether or not the orders are consistent with law. Okay. But here what the judge is in fact saying is that these executive orders do in fact infringe on the individual constitutional rights, but they are justified in the name of the public interest. Okay, I presume that if the court comes to the conclusion that between two alternatives that the state could have implemented, one being unconstitutional and the other one being constitutional, the court would have to strike down the measure that was unconstitutional. In this particular case, it's not about the court usurping the power of the government and choosing from equally constitutional remedies. I don't know if this decision is going to get appealed, if there's going to be the opportunity for the decision to get appealed, but to me it sounds like a decision that should be appealed. It's not up to the court to draft the regulations for the government. It is specifically up to the courts to ensure that any regulation that infringes, suspends, or eliminates an individual constitutional right is drafted as narrowly as possible. And if it is not drafted as narrowly as possible, strike it down, send it back, draft it again. Plaintiffs also challenge the constitutionality of the Emergency Management Act, which the judge promptly dismisses as follows. Plaintiffs' challenge to the delegation of power from the legislator to the executive will likely not succeed. It is certainly true that the legislator cannot grant some vague, unfettered discretion to the executive to carry out what is a legislative function. But if the challenged legislation contains sufficient guidance to the executive on how to execute the law to further the legislature's policy, it does not violate the non-delegation doctrine. And then with respect to the harm to the public interest criteria, which we saw at the beginning of this vlog, the judge writes as follows. Finally, and for many of the same reasons, the court concludes that entry of a preliminary injunction would be more detrimental to the public than it would to plaintiffs. Although the court is painfully aware of the difficulties of living under the restrictions of these executive orders, those difficulties are temporary, while to those who contract the virus and cannot recover, and to their family members and friends, it is all too permanent. That is not to say that every new virus will require the action taken here, but given the authority of the governor to do so in the face of these circumstances, the court must conclude issuing injunctive relief would not serve the public interest, despite the temporary harm to plaintiffs' constitutional rights. For these reasons, plaintiffs' motion for a preliminary injunction is denied. And this closing paragraph, with respect, illustrates what I feel to be the fundamental flaw in the judge's reasoning. The judge basically says that it's not every time there's a virus that the government is going to have to implement these kinds of measures. And the precedent set in this judgment is that when the state does do that, it's not up to the courts to second guess or play Monday morning quarterback, even if those measures are in fact unconstitutional. Because we do have to be clear here, the judge did not come to the conclusion that the measures implemented by Michigan were constitutional. He said that the unconstitutionality of those measures was justified in the public interest.
Because I like you so much, Viva Fry, I am going to show you exactly why that occurs. I got my handy dandy 1828. This is a book that Justice Scalia would use when looking up and defining words, because he was originalist. Let's see what inalienable inalienable. What the definition is for inalienable. Inalienable. In and alienable. From Latin. Unalienable. They first describe it as unalienable. That cannot be legally or justly alienated or transferred to another. The dominions of a king are inalienable. Well, let me tell you something about that. Go ask King John if his dominion was inalienable. Go ask him if a bunch of barons and lords didn't get together and alien his property. Yeah, and then there was another king, probably around the middle of the 17th century in England, and they beheaded him. His head wasn't even inalienable. So, I don't know if that's the best argument. All men have certain natural rights which are inalienable. The estate of a minor is inalienable without a reservation of the right of redemption or the authority of the legislature. Imagine that. Inalienable means that the government can put a lien on it. The government can limit it. That's what inalienable right means. It's kind of like you're in a lien. You're leaning on somebody. Get it? All right, now let's go to this word unalienable. Unalienable, not alienable. That cannot be alienated. That may not be transferred as unalienable rights. Yeah, see, unalienable means that nobody can take that right except for your creator, if you've really made your creator that upset. No man or woman can take an unalienable right from you. No government can take an unalienable right from you, but governments don't offer unalienable rights. There is not one time throughout all of the history of mankind where governments have offered unalienable rights. Never happened. The only thing the government does when they're writing legislation, law, statutes, whatever you wish to call it, is they're limiting the rights that they already recognize you having. For instance, let's just use this as an example. Second Amendment. Yeah, you have the right to bear arms until you wish to go buy a fully automatic weapon. Then we gotta permit you to do that. Or, I don't know, let's think of another one. Oh, you got a right to free speech as long as you stay in the free speech zones. You got free speech, just watch what you say, right? Or let's think about another one. Oh, you got a right to worship however you see fit or however you please until coronavirus comes around. And that's what government does. Hey, it's for the best for everybody, but it might not be the best for you. Anyways, since we're in the middle of looking some of this stuff up, why don't we just look at what alienable means? Alienable. That may be sold or transferred to another, as land is alienable according to the laws of the state. Interesting. Just remember, your rights are your property. And rights are kind of like a muscle. You either got to use them or you're going to lose them. Right now, Americans haven't known rights for a really long time. Thanks for being up with me. I'm about to go get some sleep. Peace.